Well, welcome back. I'm glad to see you all again. It's good to be here. Now, we have a wonderful story today. It is Daniel. Now, some of you might know the story of Daniel in the lion's den, but let's just see where we go. Daniel was one of several young men, children, or noblemen that were taken from his homeland in Judah by a king of Babylon. He was taken to Babylon. It was a long journey. And when they finally got there, they were put under the charge of one of the servants of the king. And they were given a great place to stay, wonderful food right from the king's table. But there was a problem. See, Daniel and his friends were from Judah, and in Judah there were certain customs and laws handed down by God that they could not eat certain food or food offered to idols. And the food coming from the king's table would have been offered to idols. So Daniel and his friends didn't want to eat it because then they would have defiled themselves. That's a funny word, isn't it? Anyways, Daniel and his friends had to think quick. What were they going to do? And they went to the servant that was in charge of them and said, "Excuse me, but we can't eat that food." And the servant said, "But it's the best. It's right from the king's table." Daniel said, "No." "Well, what are you going to eat?" the servant asked. Daniel said, "Can you please just supply us with grains and vegetables, and we'll be fine." Oh, the servant says, "But if you get sick because you're not eating good enough, the king will be very upset." And Daniel suggested, "Let us have just the grains and vegetables for 1 week and then see how healthy we are." Well, after a week, guess who was healthier? Daniel and his friends were healthier than the others that were given the food from the king's table. They had honored their God by following his laws. Now, Daniel and his friends, his 3 special friends were Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. And you have to read the book of Daniel because there's a wonderful fiery furnace story. But that's their story, not Daniel's. So Daniel and his friends, they were taught the language of the people that they now lived with in Babylon. But the king also wanted Daniel to be an advisor to help the king and his officials to rule the land of Judah now that it belonged to Babylon. The king wanted Daniel to help him. So quickly, Daniel became very important in the country. He learned, he followed God's laws, and he did a lot of things right. God was with him and helped him. To the point that the king decided that he was going to put over his 127 provinces. Now, have you seen a map of Canada? There's not 127 provinces in Canada. So it was a lot of different provinces in this country. And over each of that 127 provinces of Babylon, the king put a governor in charge. And over top of that 127 governors, he had 3 special men that would govern them and report back to the king. Well, Daniel was one of these 3 special men. And he was so good at his job that the king started to think, maybe I'll put Daniel in charge and have 3 men under him in charge of the 127 provinces. So that would make Daniel really important to the king. Now, some of those other governors, they heard about this plan of the king to maybe move Daniel up. And they were jealous of how important Daniel was to the king. So they came up with a plan. And their plan was to go to the king and suggest to him that for 30 days, no one could go to worship a different god. They could only ask things of the king. They knew that every day Daniel went to his window, the one that faced his homeland of Judah, and he prayed there at least twice a day to God, the God of Judah, the God that was with him even though he lived far away in Babylon. And sure enough, those jealous men saw him do it. And they went to the king with their plan. King, we have a plan. We have a law that we want you to put down and sign that for the next 30 days, no one can offer any prayers or ask anything of any god except you, king. Well, the king thought this was pretty good, and he signed the law. Well, when the law was made known and Daniel heard about it, he had to make a big choice. Does he follow the law and not pray to his God? Or does he still continue to pray to God? Now, there was punishment if you didn't obey the king's law. If you asked something of another god, you were going to be put to death by being thrown into a pit of hungry lions. And Daniel had a big choice. And do you know what Daniel chose? You got it. Daniel followed his God. And he went to the window and prayed to God, just like always. And those jealous men, they were watching him do it. And they quickly ran back to the king and said, King, someone's not following your new law. And the king said, Who? And the jealous men said, Daniel. And the king was upset. He was so sad. He didn't want anything to happen to Daniel. But he had to have Daniel taken away and thrown into that pit of lions. And there was a cover put over top of the pit. And the king spent all night worrying. He couldn't sleep. He was so worried that something would happen to Daniel. And early the next morning, he rushed out and he called down into the pit, Daniel, are you there? And Daniel answered, Yes, my God kept me safe. He sent an angel and he shut the mouths of the lions, and I'm here. So the king had Daniel taken up out of the pit. And he sent word all the way through the nation that people were to honor and respect and fear the God of Daniel. And then he promoted Daniel to a better job. So Daniel's our hero. He relied on God. He stood up for what he believed in more than once, and God used him mightily in the land of Babylon for 3 different kings in the land of Babylon. So wasn't that a great story? Anyways, we'll see you again another time. There's a real good one coming tomorrow. Bye.